what are, you talked a little bit about some of the ATMP specific challenges, working in rare disease, low batches, low volume, small batches, that kind of thing, the complexity. In your mind, does that complexity and those challenges and the accelerated clinical designs and compressed timelines in the space that you're in, does that warrant investment in advanced process analytics and control technologies, or does it in fact detract from that investment? Like it's sort of six one, half dozen of the other proposition.
No, yeah, I think it's a pretty interesting question, and you get a bit of both, because if you make the investment up front, then you may be able to better handle the accelerated compressed timelines that you face from a developmental side. But you also may struggle with, do you necessarily have a case for an ROI in the investment if it happens to be very product specific, because of the potential limited number of batches. So you have to kind of find that right balance of investment. The other aspect is you need to think about it early, because once you're under the gun, or you have something that you think is going on in an accelerated time frame, you don't really have a lot of time to step back and say, oh, we should really invest in automation in this area, for example. Mm-hmm. Projects that may take time to put in place and build, then it becomes challenging when you're now faced with some time pressure on the development.
Right. Yeah. Follow-up questions from Jean-Marc. To run large experiments, how do you validate scale down models? How can small scale BRs help?
Yeah, that's a challenging area. Ideally, you're able to look across the scales that you operate at and see how the data correlates or doesn't. So you may have things that scale, parameters that scale really well, and hey, for this result, I get consistent results across the scales that we're using all the way up to manufacturing. And in some cases, it may not model it directly, and you may need to look at, do you have an offset factor, or can you understand where the limitations are? And sometimes that does, trigger that you need to do some large scale characterization work. So it's looking, I think it's really looking at the data that you have from the various scales and being able to see whether it's modeling it correctly. And I guess where it's not, you can also explore, can I make some tweaks to the parameters or how I run the model so that it better reflects the large scale experience.
Yeah. Perfect. What advice would you have for leaders of early stage biotechs who are perhaps considering the in-house versus outsourcing debate around analytical development?
Yeah, I think leaders have a lot of choice in front of them, and you have a great choice of contract labs or that can do fantastic work when you need it, and I think you need to step back and think about, well, what's important for the product. I'd say it's more challenging to outsource things that are more complex. So if it's really complex work, think about whether it makes sense to do it in-house, or there might be a very specialized provider who is an expert in that area, and then maybe you do outsource it. The other thing to think about is, how do you make sure you get the product knowledge that you're looking for, and so that is easier when it's in-house, right? The people, you get all the knowledge from all the work that you do. sometimes you have a little more challenge gaining those same insights when it's contracted out. And there, I think it's, yeah, trying to build relationships with if you do contract stuff out, to build strong relationships with the teams that are working on your product, so that you can try and gain the insights as best as possible. So I don't think there's one answer, and leaders have to essentially look at their product and look at the resources they have available to them, and there's trade-offs with the decisions, and you try and make the best decision for the company and for the product.
Yeah, good insight into that decision-making process. Miles is taking a look at our second polling question. Got that handy? Are you currently outsourcing any elements of the following? Choose all that apply, and you can read them. I won't rattle through the bullets. Just wondering what you're maybe outsourcing there, and the last option is none. We do it all in house. So we'll take a look at those results here in a minute. We talked just briefly, Josh, about the regulatory sort of paradigm in the space. How are FDA and/or EMA guidelines regarding the adoption of some of these technologies? How have those changed maybe since you've been working in the space? I mean,
I'd say in general, health agencies don't tend to be prescriptive about a particular type of equipment or technology. So I think, there's flexibility for sponsors to pick tools that are appropriate and, essentially support why it's relevant or appropriate for the product that's being developed. And so I think the guidances that come out are really helpful in terms of how you should think about particular challenges or specific types of data that, you should be generating. But I think it gives some flexibility in terms of how exactly you do that, or what tools you deploy to do that.
Yeah. So you don't necessarily see the regulatory perception of those tools like creating any efficiencies in terms of what you're doing. I mean, there's not really a correlation there.
No, not a real correlation. I mean, other than, health agencies get to see what everybody does, right? And so they see a broader set of data than a sponsor. So they may see something and point out, hey, think about doing X, Y, or Z.
Mm-hmm.
If you're able to have that engagement with them. But that, doesn't happen super frequently where they'd point out a specific technology per se.
Yeah. All right, Miles, let's take a look at the poll results. In-house, lots of in-house. Some PD outsourced. What do you think of that, Josh? Does that surprise you?
No, it doesn't surprise me. I think every company has to look at do the make, build, buy type analysis for their products. And of course you have some strong CDMOs out there who do great development and then move it into manufacturing. So yeah, not particularly surprised that you have people outsourcing those activities.
Yeah. Around like process characterization, process optimization, clone strain and construct screening. So some of these more sort of specific elements. Do you think that will that number would increase as time goes on, perhaps as the outsourced community matures, as technologies mature to enable better data sharing, or do you think that'll always sort of remain in-house?
Yeah, I mean, you may see some increases. I think there, as sponsor, you want to understand your product, and so, yeah, it's a mix. But if you outsource the process development early on, you may not have internal knowledge, and then that presents some challenges for characterization later.
Yeah.
So Yeah.
Very good. Well, in the time we have left here, I wanted to ask what sort of a one-to-one question for members of our audience. And that's just on advice. Like generally, what advice would you give others in your space if they're working through the development and adoption of new analytical technologies?
Yeah. Think about your product. It's about the product and bringing value to patients. So you try and do high quality development. Keep retains. Sometimes material is pretty limited, but it really helps when you keep retains, so that as new technologies become available, you can go back and understand what you did in the past. So that, I don't know. I think that if I was hammering home a message, it's put retains in the freezer, and you'll be happy, a few years from now when you have an improvement and you can go back to that.
Well, that's perfect. Advice doesn't get any more specific than that, I mean, you could have said something like, "Oh, try to do good work, wake up motivated every day." No, that's very specific advice,
Yeah.
which is very valuable. So, Josh, I appreciate it. We're out of time here, but I appreciate your willingness to answer my rambling questions, to entertain questions from the audience that you had no idea what they were going to be, what they'd look like, and you did a pro job responding to them. Super appreciative of your time and insight.
Oh, thanks, Matt. Been fun today, and thanks to those who listened and submitted questions. So thank you.
I'd like to thank our audience too. That is all the time we have for today, but we'll be back next month. We'll be back next month at 11 a.m. on April 24th for a deep dive on single-use technologies with Crystal Biotech VP of Technical Operations, Mark Petrich, and single-use guru and Bioprocess Systems Alliance member extraordinaire, Paul Priebe. Join us for that. And in the meantime, visit us at bioprocessonline.com. Subscribe to the Business of Biotech podcast, and be sure to check out our friends at Culture Biosciences. Thanks for tuning in, and enjoy the rest of your week.